This is a spoiler warning. The following video will contain spoilers for Doctor Who It Takes You Away. So if you haven't seen the episode yet, go and watch it now, and then come back here later. Wow. That's all I could say after watching this episode. It was quite unlike anything Doctor Who has ever attempted before. It was mad and bonkers and outrageous and flawed, but beautiful too. Watching this episode was a completely immersive experience. Ed Hime's thrilling script, full of twists and turns, had me on the edge of my seat throughout. It sets itself up as a Scandinavian horror story before, quite literally, going in a completely different direction, with the Doctor and her friends taking a trip through a mirror to an alien anti-zone and then a parallel universe. And if that wasn't enough, it ends with one of the most left-field scenes in the show's history, as the Doctor tries to persuade a sentient universe, in the guise of a frog sitting on a chair, to let her go. For an episode that starts and ends with pretty much the same shot of the TARDIS in the woods, a lot happens in its 50-minute runtime. At no point did I feel bored or worried that things were getting too predictable. On the contrary, I thought this was one of the most engaging and exciting Doctor Who episodes we've had all series. The script also uses the regular cast very well, splitting them up into a number of little groups over the course of the episode. We have the Doctor and Graham, Ryan and Yaz, Ryan and Graham, the Doctor, Graham and Yaz, the Doctor and Yaz, etc, etc. These ever-changing combinations stop things from feeling repetitive or formulaic, instead providing lots of opportunities for character development. Fans will continue to brand Yaz as the weakest link in this TARDIS team, and okay, perhaps she is, but I think she had just as much to do in this episode as Ryan and Graham, especially in the episode's third act when she and the Doctor were bouncing off each other. That said, Ryan and Graham have been the main point of focus for much of the series, due to the death of Grace and the impact that that's had on their characters, and this episode was no exception. I had an inkling that we'd see Sharon D. Clarke again at some point, reprising her role as Grace. Having a story where Grace and/or Ryan somehow meets her again was too good an opportunity to miss, so I'm glad the idea was taken up and It Takes You Away. I really enjoyed Clarke in The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and I thought she gave another great performance here. I just love the earthiness that she brings to the role. Grace always seems like such an ordinary, grounded character. The scenes between Grace and Graham were played with a great deal of emotion, with Bradley Walsh giving one of his best turns as Graham. My only gripe is that we didn't get to see more of them together again. No sooner had Graham found her than he was having to face saying goodbye to Grace again, because of how late she was introduced into the episode. The Solid Tract universe was used as a means of exploring the episode's key themes of loss, grief and loneliness. It's like a parallel universe, or an Alice in Wonderland-esque upside-down world, a reflection of our own reality where things are a little bit different and not quite as they seem. This effect is conveyed well by some clever visual tricks, such as the bright sunny weather of the Solid Tract world in contrast to the bleaker tones of the real world. There's also the very subtle but genius technique of flipping all the camera shots in the Solid Tract world to suggest an otherworldly quality. And Grace and Trina both emerge from behind flowing white sheets, which implies they can't be completely trusted and they're hiding something. As is often the case in parallel world stories in sci-fi and other media, the Solid Tract world is set up as running alongside the real world, like an alternative to the real world, and there's at least one character who has to choose between the two. Eric and Graham both find themselves in this position. They have to choose whether to stay with their wife in the Solid Tract world or their child/grandchild in the real world. I do think they missed a trick in not making more of a parallel between Eric and Graham. I'd also like to have seen the line about Eric not being well after his wife's death developed further, as it alluded to some interesting discussions about mental illness. Instead, the episode ends by focusing on the Solid Tract's own insecurities. I'm surprised the show has never tackled the idea of a sentient universe before. It's a brilliant Doctor Who concept. And the resolution makes sense. At the end of the day, the Solid Tract was just lonely and desperately wants to be part of our universe. I'll admit that when we found the Doctor in the White Void world, I was sort of hoping the Solitract would take the form of someone she knew, someone from the Doctor's past, such as Susan. Just imagine how good that would have been. I think it would have worked well in the context of the story, and it would have felt earned. I can see why they didn't do something like that though. The rationale behind having the Solitract manifest itself as a frog sat on a chair, however, is slightly more bewildering. It's certainly not the first thing that would have come into my head. But hey, it was very Doctor Who to have a godlike, sentient being take on such a ridiculously simple form. One thing I'd like to have seen more of is the Doctor alone in the Solitract universe, getting to explore it a bit more and getting to know the Solitract a bit better. This would have made her line, "You're the maddest, most beautiful thing I've ever experienced," feel that little bit more justified, in my opinion. But the real question is it takes you away the maddest, most beautiful thing I've ever experienced? Well, I wouldn't quite go as far as saying that, but it was certainly the quirkiest entry to Series 11 so far. Ed Heim's first script for the show is something to behold, brimming with high-concept ideas, but perhaps a few too many to do justice to in the 50-minute runtime. Still, there was a lot in this episode to enjoy. It subverted my expectations in more ways than I could have imagined, keeping me guessing right to the very end. Overall, a pretty phenomenal effort. And before I draw this video to a close, here are some random thoughts about the episode that I couldn't fit into my main review. It's the moment we've all been waiting for, Ryan finally calling Graham Grandad. But it's interesting that this moment has come in the penultimate episode of the series, and not in the finale. What does this mean for the future of their relationship? I'm intrigued to see what's next for the three companions, and in what ways they'll be challenged in the finale. If you think this episode was the first time we saw evidence of Grace's obsession with frogs, think again. She was in fact wearing that very frog necklace throughout The Woman Who Fell to Earth, right from the very first scene. That episode also features a couple of frog ornaments, one in Graham and Grace's living room, and another in Ryan's bedroom next to his framed photo of Grace. A very subtle, but very sneaky bit of set dressing. Now, who is the Doctor referring to in the coming soon trailer for the Battle of Ranskor of Kolos when she says, "I know that voice"? To be honest, I'm putting my money on Tim Shaw, but I'd love to be surprised though. Still, it's not long before we find out. So that does it for this review. I'd love to know what you thought of It Takes You Away, so please post your thoughts and mini-reviews in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week for my review of the Battle of Ranskor of Kolos.